Special message for History Uncovered listeners. For the next 2 months, we'll be conducting a survey as part of the Airwave Network to help us to get to know you, your interests, and what you think of the show. You can find the questionnaire at surveymonkey.com/r/airwave. And as a special thank you, you'll be entered for a chance to win a $500 Amazon gift card. Again, that's surveymonkey.com/r/airwave, or you can click the link in our episode notes. Welcome to History Happy Hour, a special series from History Uncovered. It's the end of February 2023, and we've handpicked a few of our favorite history stories from this month. Today we'll be talking about
a new study that examined Impressionist paintings and found that they may have depicted air pollution,
the discovery of encrypted letters written by Mary Queen of Scots while she was in prison,
as well as a number of monumental historic anniversaries, including the 110th birthday of Rosa Parks and the 100th anniversary of the opening of King Tut's tomb.
And we'll also discuss some incredible stories from Black history that we published in February.
I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey. And welcome to History Happy Hour. I got my nice room temperature ginger ale.
Perfect.
Because we are recording this at 1 p.m. But hey, if you're listening, feel free to drink whatever you want to drink. I'm not in charge of you.
Let's dig in and start with the story of Solomon Perel.
Solomon Perel just died recently, which is an unfortunate thing, but he did die at 97 years old. So he had a fairly long life, which was very fortunate and interesting and trying to think of the right term, almost defying fate.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
It really is. For some context, Solomon Perel was a German Jew living in Germany, and he actually posed as a member of the Hitler Youth during World War II in order to escape death, sort of in direct opposition of his father's urging, which was to always remain faithful to always remain a Jew. And he instead followed his mother's advice, which was to live. Mm-hmm. He then released an autobiography in 1990 following a seizure he had in the 80s where he wanted to share his life story. That was eventually turned into the film Europa, Europa. What I thought was really interesting about his story was the way he described his double life as almost schizophrenic. He said, "During the day, I was a German youth who wanted to win the war. I sang songs against Jews and yelled, 'Hail Hitler.' And at night in bed, I cried out of longing for my family."
Yeah, it's like he had to develop two personalities. It was interesting too. He said, looking back on that time, how much love he had for the second person he became, because that person saved his life, even though it made it really complicated for him after the war to kind of figure out who he was and to return to his old self.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was a layer of guilt in there as well. And I believe he said it was almost, obviously before the term existed, but it was almost like a form of Stockholm syndrome too, where it seemed like he almost actively rooted for Germany to win the war because he had to play that role so often and because their propaganda was so influential and powerful.
Yeah, right. Because as part of the Hitler Youth, he was going to classes and being told all of this stuff. Right. And he was only, I think, 16. It's a young
very
guy.
Much impressionable, very much in a situation of intense indoctrination.
Yeah. Have you seen Europa?
I've not. I've actually never even heard of it, but now I'm very curious because I would like to know more about his story.
I watched the trailer. I haven't seen it either, but yeah, it's really an incredible. It seems like something that would happen in the movies and not real life.
Yeah, for sure. So tragic passing, but something to be said about the fact that he lived as long as he did and was able to share his story with the world.
Yeah, you said he was 97 when he died. So
97, yeah.
It's a pretty good amount of years, yeah.
I only expect to make it to 40, so.
Well, hopefully a bit longer than that.
Ideally, yeah.
Well, someone who barely made it past 40, she was 44 when she died, was Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh, hey, nice.
Thank you. I had to look that up really fast. One of the news articles we covered this month was about these letters that she wrote that she encoded while she was imprisoned by Queen Elizabeth. And the crazy thing about this story, I think, is that the letters were mislabeled and they were like sitting in an archive for years. And then I don't know if they were historians or what, but they went in to look at the letters and they thought they were something else. It's like a side project. And they were like, oh my God, this is Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh, wow.
And they said about like decoding them. And, it's not like they were anything really juicy. It was like about her health and her enemies and, her desired return to the Scottish throne and things like that. But
sure, yeah. But to get a firsthand account when you weren't expecting that either, I think that's really interesting. They, like you said, not really knowing what these things were and then being like, oh, wait a second.
Wait a minute. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how often that happens. I've written a couple of articles in the last couple of months, not letters, but it's like fossils that someone just forgot. It's just in a back room somewhere. And people are like, actually, this is really important, whatever this thing is. Like, this is like the missing piece.
I covered one like that recently. It was about, it was the last Tasmanian devil or Tasmanian tiger. But yeah, it was very much like, these bones or the skin or the fossil or whatever it was just literally sitting in a cupboard somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And then they were like, oh, this was just never categorized, but this is like massively important to our research.
It's just wild. It happens all the time. And it makes you think, what else is just tucked away right now? Letters or fossils or whatever. It's all sorts of stuff.
And that stuff that's tucked away in museums or in collections. And then you think about like what might just be in someone's attic.
Yeah, we had an article last year about this woman in Montana who had one of the Dead Sea Scrolls in her house. She had it framed on her wall. And she'd and she'd gone to Israel in the 60s and someone had given it to her. And it came out that this is actually a really rare piece of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So
insane.
Yeah. So you never know. Keep an eye on your friends and family's walls. Speaking of things that hang on walls.
A new study recently went back and examined Impressionist paintings from mostly Claude Monet and Joseph Mallard William Turner, and sort of looking at the hazy theme throughout these paintings and saying, was this just a stylistic choice or was there more to this? And basically the study found that sort of in contrast to what we typically think of Impressionism as, which is usually a perception style, very much coming from the artist's perception of a time, of a place. Mm-hmm. They think there might have actually been a little bit more of a realistic approach taken with certain Impressionist paintings, and that the haze that became so characteristic of these paintings might have actually represented air pollution.
Ugh, crazy.
Yeah, it is. And it's, keep in mind, these guys were they were painting during the Industrial Revolution at a time when the heart of cities were rife with factories and pumping out coal. And I know I mentioned this to you the other day, but growing up in Pittsburgh, we are often told of that time period when you could not see the actual sky over Pittsburgh during the day. So it looked like night all the time in Pittsburgh at a certain point in history.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, about the paintings, because they do have that hazy kind of, it's sort of romantic in that when you look at the paintings, but to think about it, smog makes you think about them differently.
Right. And what I thought was really interesting was that they didn't find it like disgusting or anything. It was, in fact, Claude Monet wrote about his love of what they called London fog in a letter to his wife. He wrote, I'm working very hard, although this morning I really thought the weather had changed completely. When I got up, I was terrified to see that there was no fog, not even a wisp of mist. I was prostrate and could see all my painting done for. But gradually the fires were lit and the smoke and haze came back. So,
wow. Huh.
Right. It wasn't even an awareness of like, hey, this is terrible for us. This is, there was something almost romantic about it. But what I thought was really interesting about the study was that they focused on Monet and Turner specifically because neither of them had vision problems that would have influenced that sort of haze. And if you look at the trajectory of their paintings over the years, you can see that Monet in particular used less and less contrast in his paintings as the time went on. And other Impressionists similarly did the same thing. And if you look at like a chart of the emissions over the years, there's a direct correlation between the lack of contrast and the increase in emissions. Oh, so they would have likely been painting more smog, essentially.
Oh, Jeez. It's so interesting that it's like what you said about them seeing it as a romantic thing. And I wonder if that ties into people seeing like the Industrial Revolution as this great, technology moving forward or.
Yeah. It was a fundamental moment. And it's such a cool story too, because it doesn't really change our understanding of history much. Like we're well aware now in the modern age that there was a lot of air pollution and the skies were filled with smoke. But kind of changes our understanding of art history and what Impressionism means. And the term they used in the study was polluted realism, which I found really interesting because it's
a good name for a band too.
It is a really good name for a band. Very like Rage Against the Machine style.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting study. I don't know what inspired it. It seems like a very weird choice to focus on.
Yeah, it's like they look at a painting and they're like, that kind of looks like smog. Oh, maybe it was smog. Let's dig into this. Check that out.
Might have been something like that. But fascinating study one way or another.
Well, our next story was not a careful study at all. It was a complete accident. And it was the discovery of this pendant in England, which happened to date back to the era of Henry VIII. I guess I'll start by asking you if you have ever used a metal detector before.
I haven't, but I really want to.
Yeah. I feel like I have when I was a kid, but some people love using them and they use them all the time. And this story starts with this guy in England who basically the story was that his dog died and he was sad. He wanted to get some fresh air. So he took his metal detector to his friend's property and was just walking around. And it started going off. And so he started digging and he found this golden pendant in the ground. And when he brought it to local museums, they were flabbergasted because it seemed to come from Henry VIII's era, and it had his initials and his first wife Catherine's initials, and they studied it and they realized it's 500 years old, it's 24 karat gold, and there's some mystery about it because it looked like it had been made very quickly, so they thought maybe it was not meant to be worn so much, but was maybe for a tournament or something. But the cool part about the story is that so much about Catherine was destroyed because he didn't want to remember her after he went on and married 5 other women after.
Right. And he literally invented a church so that he could leave her.
Right.
So
yeah.
Understandable that not much about her.
It's so rare to find this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually an insane find.
It's crazy. The heartwarming part of the story is that in England, there's a law where if you find a treasure like this, a museum will buy it from you and the person whose property it is will split the profits. So this guy and his friend are going to split the profits from this pendant, and he said he's going to just use it for his kids' education.
Yeah,
that was nice. Really sweet. Yeah.
Do you know, did it say how much money they were getting for it?
I don't think so, no.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah, but it must be a lot for something. It seems like it's a priceless artifact.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, even just being a 24 karat gold pendant on its own would probably fetch a decent amount of money.
Yeah, and just how incredible. And they don't know how it ended up in this field either. If someone had buried it at one point or dropped it or what the story is, they have no idea.
What region of England was it from?
Warwickshire. I don't know where that is though.
I don't know where that is either. I'm not good at geography in the first place. Yeah, I'd be so interested to know the story of how it ended up where it ended up, whether it was stolen or whether, like you said, it might have been won in a tournament or as a tournament prize or commemoration.
Yeah, if it could have been maybe one of her supporters had it and just held on to it after she was tossed aside or something. I don't know. Yeah. It's just that it's hard to know.
Did she have lovers on the side?
I don't think so. She was pretty Catholic and devout from what I know.
Yeah, there's an interesting history there.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, everything he did, is fascinating and strange.
Yeah. He very much fundamentally changed the entirety of England.
Yeah, and the pursuit of having a son, which he did have, but his daughters became the most famous, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. Just ironic. I guess history can be ironic like that sometimes.
I feel like a lot of the time history is very ironic.
Yeah, a lot of the times.
I think the more I learn about history, which I probably learned more about history in the past 8 months since I started working here than I maybe have in my entire life. Wow. I'm just that is horribly ironic.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. As we've been talking about the Titanic recently, so much irony from you look at quotes from beforehand where they're nothing would ever sink this ship. And
right.
Sorry. But hey, speaking of ship disasters, marking the anniversary, the 125th anniversary this month, on February 15th, was the 125th anniversary of the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, which is one of, obviously we say remember the Maine. It is a very, very prominent event still 125 years after it happened. Do you know much about the explosion of the USS Maine?
I know the basic details of it, but you wrote about it recently, right?
I did, yeah. So it's a little bit fresh in my head, but the funny thing is, I think beyond the basic details, there really still is not that much. Cuba was in a very interesting state at the time with ongoing revolts and revolutions, and the United States was there, and it really, over the course of the next 100 years, was kind of the same situation between the United States and Cuba. But yeah, while the Havana was parked there, a sudden explosion set it off, and they still don't really know what caused it. Some people suggested that it was a mine. Other people have thrown out theories over the years that there was some sort of sabotage at play, but there's not really any evidence for that. It's still very much a mystery.
Isn't there like these theories that it was just like an accident too, right? That it was like a boiler or something problem.
Yeah. Could have been an accident, could have been sabotage, could have been, like they hit a mine, but there's no like definitive proof. I mean, there have been several investigations. Do
they think it probably like wasn't Spain though? Or is the mine theory like it was like a Spanish mine that...
I think, the theory is it was a Spanish mine, but they very much used it as an excuse to go to war with Spain.
For sure, yeah.
It pretty much kicked off the Spanish-American War, but historical investigations over the years have not really found Spain to be directly responsible for it.
It's pretty incredible. Like if this was an accident, just what it led to, which was, completely changed the world dynamics given how much territory the U.S. was able to snatch up, and Cuban history as well. And
yeah, definitely one of those things that beyond, like you said, the basics, I don't remember ever touching on it in school. And it seems like such a fundamental moment in Western history.
I feel like in my history classes in like high school, it would have been like da 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 da, and then the ship exploded and that started the war. They wouldn't have like gone into all these details about it. Like in college more, because I took a lot of American history classes, there was more stuff. It came up a bit more, but
For sure, yeah. I went to film school, so I did not talk about it much. And look at me now.
I have a degree in American history and French, so, we did well. Good choices. Well, speaking of American history, the other anniversary we're marking in this episode is the birth of Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
Who was born February 4th, 1913. So 100 years ago. 110 years ago.
110
It is 2023 now. Yeah.
I know. Feels like we're still living in 2013.
At least 2020. I mean,
years.
No time has changed since then. But yeah, she was born. She obviously had a huge impact on American history, refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus in 1955. You know what's crazy, and I was reading about this to kind of brush up on the story before, is that Martin Luther King was 26 when he started the Montgomery bus boycott with her and others. I know, he was so young. I know.
No.
And he was really young when he died. I think he was in his like late 30s. But yeah, he was really, really young during the civil rights movement. Incredible.
That is, that is inspiring and upsetting at the same time.
Right.
Being a few months away from 27, it's like, God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, she definitely changed American history. Less than a year later, it was ruled that bus segregation was illegal, unconstitutional. And obviously that like set a huge
precedent. Yeah,
I mean that it's kind of built up more towards the civil rights movement, and that's why she's called the mother of the civil rights movement. Yeah,
I was gonna say, like, if you only know two names from the civil rights movement, it's Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. So very much an important birthday. Happy belated birthday, Miss Parks.
Indeed.
We have another little fun bit of Black history, not quite as monumentous, but this year is the 100th year of the first all-Black basketball team. That would be the New York Renaissance, who formed on February 13th, 1923. I don't have much else to say about them, but I felt it was important to bring up.
Well, our next anniversary isn't a sport per se, the sport of archaeology.
The sport of adventure.
The sport of adventure, yeah. It's kind of crazy because these stories, like, you know, on the one hand, it's like Indiana Jones type stuff. And on the other, you're like, you just opened someone's... Anyway, the story is that... The story is Howard Carter, who's a British archaeologist, opening King Tut's tomb for the first time.
Yeah. And unleashing the curse.
Actually, a lot of people from this expedition, like, did
I know,
die
in
mysteriously,
very weird circumstances, yeah.
Yeah. He was like, he'd been looking for a long time for, I can't remember if it was Tut's tomb or just like a tomb. And he was on the last year. He only had like one more year of funding. And then he found this and he walked in and he describes how he has this description of like hot air like rushing out of the chamber and the haze, and then how he suddenly can see, you know, statues of animals and just gold everywhere. And obviously like King Tut's mask is very famous and has been exhibited around the world.
It is, like you said, though, it is kind of funny. It is so glorified, like like this specific type of archaeology, that very early 1900s explorer with the explorer cap on and probably a monocle and
yeah,
like, and then just, but it is kind of just glorified grave robbing at a certain point.
Yeah, I know.
Like these tombs were not meant to be open. They were very convoluted with like, there's a reason there were a lot of traps and things to protect the dead.
I think about this about like archaeology in general, and I'm always fascinated about what people find, but you know, a lot of it's like just digging up someone's grave and being like, oh, and they have like a nail through their head. I wonder why that is. And you're like,
right.
Oh, like I do too. I also wonder why that is, but releasing all sorts of bad, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
very much was not the intention when these people were buried. But, you know, we learn a lot. So there's something there.
I'd love to go to Egypt.
Oh, no, I would also love to go to Egypt. There are so many places in the world I want to go. To derail the topic of conversation for a moment, where, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go?
That I haven't been to before?
No, I'll say if you've been there and you really want to go back, I think that counts.
I think I would want to go somewhere new. I think I would want to go to like Japan, because I haven't been to Asia at all.
That was going to be my answer as well. I would love to go
to
Japan. Yeah. I think
awesome.
Japanese temples are so beautiful. I would love to visit some of the temples in Japan. Not for religious reasons, though, just to see them.
Yeah. I want to do that and like the hot springs and I want to go to like Hokkaido, and because I think Sapporo beer is from there, and like go there and then go to a hot spring. And
I have a case of Sapporo beer in our basement downstairs.
Oh, nice.
It's like my favorite beer, which is so...
Speaking of King Tut, did you know that he has a cocktail?
That I actually did not know. I have a whole book on cocktails, and I flip through it every now and then, but this either was not in there or I've just not gone to that page.
I think it was probably not in there because it was made for a special occasion in Ontario when a King Tut exhibition was passing through. It was at the art gallery in Ontario, and a hotel bartender made up the King Tut martini, and he said it had to have one ingredient in particular, which is Goldschlager. Do you know what that is?
I do know what Goldschlager is. That was oh god, that was like one of those, like the dive bar I went to in college. We thought we were being cool by ordering shots of Goldschlager the one day.
Oh my god!
It basically just tastes like Fireball, but the shtick with it is that it has like gold flakes in it, like actual gold flakes.
Awesome.
I have some memories. Well, I guess I don't have memories because I was drinking Goldschlager. You know what I mean? Like I have memories of forgetting my night.
Yeah, it says, I had never heard of it before, but yeah, real 24 karat gold, and it's hot cinnamon flavor. So yeah, it does sound like Fireball, but like fancy.
Yeah.
You were like, no.
Oh, fancy. I mean, no, that is kind of what it's supposed to be. It's like, yeah. Well,
this one, it has, is it Goldschlager? Goldschlager, vodka, butter ripple liqueur, which I've never heard of either.
I've never heard of
and cranberry juice. So yeah, that's it. That's the King Tut martini.
It doesn't sound bad, though I don't know what butter ripple liqueur would taste like.
It seems like a weird combination of flavors to me, but I imagine it probably looks pretty with the gold.
Yeah, I mean, the cranberry with a little bit of gold in it, very like...
Yeah, very regal and pharaoh-like.
Like a rose gold iPhone.
Yeah.
When they launched those, it's like exactly what it looks like.
Right. Exactly.
Well, cool. Well, if anyone listening wants to make the King Tut Martini at home, it does require some specific ingredients, but other than that, it's only 4 things.
Yeah,
So,
and it's very simple. It's just all you need is a cocktail shaker, and you can make this happen.
or just like a glass and some teaspoons if you don't want to get a shaker. No, I guess you do
Or
need
that,
a shaker.
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Cheers.
Well, we skip ahead about 70 years from the last 2 anniversaries. This happened 3 years before I was born. Add a little perspective. I'm not gonna lie. I did not know about this event until we talked about or like discussed what we were going to talk about today. Obviously, you and I were both
kind of
alive
overshadowed.
But yeah, I was going to say you and I were both alive for the September 11th, 2001 attack. I don't remember that day in particular. Do you have any memories of September 11th?
9/11?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I was in 5th grade then, but I was on the West Coast. So it was later in the morning and we all knew something was happening. Like on the school bus, we knew the adults were concerned about something, but I didn't really realize the gravity of it until much later in my life. But this event, which I don't think we've actually said what it is, less than a decade before that happened, there was another bombing or another terrorist attack.
Yeah. February 26th, 1993, which actually, oh my God, that's my girlfriend's birthday.
Oh.
Like the day.
You can tell her that.
Oh my God, I'm going to have to go let her know.
Happy birthday, Anne. Did you know?
Jeez, yeah. So February 26, 1993, there was a van bomb went off in the parking garage of the World Trade Center's North Tower, which, yeah, I never knew about this. And then it's so interesting when you look into it. Yeah, in 1996, they discovered that there were Al-Qaeda connections. The main culprit, main suspect in this investigation, the main person they investigated, was named Ramzi Youssef. His uncle paid him and the other terrorists who planned this $660 million to do it. His name was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was Yusuf's uncle. That guy was seen as the chief architect behind the September 11th, 2001 attacks as well.
Yeah. So he had this fixation on those buildings, it seems like.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see there was like not even like a subtle warning about what could happen if the U.S. continued to not give in to terrorist demands. A very blatant, Yusuf apparently mailed letters to newspapers with 3 demands. The first being that the U.S. must end aid to Israel. Second, the U.S. must end diplomatic relations with Israel. And the third being the U.S. must pledge to end any the U.S. must pledge to end any interference with the interior affairs at any country in the Middle East. So 3 very explicitly spelled out demands that obviously were not given into. I won't cite a political opinion on that one way or another, but fascinating to think that this target was painted and these threats were made so many years before the event that is, I mean, one of the landmark events in American history.
Right. Yeah. I think I probably learned about it because I was only 3 when it happened, I think, so I wouldn't have been like aware of it going on. Yeah. But I think I learned about it watching documentaries about 9/11 later, and this was always pulled in as like before the attacks happened, this other smaller attack happened. You know, only 6 people like died in this attack, but the way that they planned it, they hoped that the bomb would knock one building into another, which could have killed 250,000 people in New York. Just insane, but they envisioned it being a much bigger attack. So then when you see it that way, it makes sense that this was a precursor to the more terrible and more infamous attack. Yeah. Right.
Sort of the test for it, if you will. And then they've said, okay, well, that's not going to work. So what can we do instead?
Yeah. Yeah. Yikes. Yeah, it's weird. You know, I live in New York now, and I don't know if you've been to like the memorial and stuff.
I have
been to, they did an incredible job with it. It's very impactful. Our final anniversary we'll touch on is this crazy story about this young woman whose body was found in a water tower at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, Elisa Lam. Do you know this story?
I do, because I remember seeing, because this only happened 10 years ago. So at that point, I was 16 10 years ago. That's math. That's easy math. Yeah. And I remember seeing the video of her in the elevator when it first came out.
Right.
And I've always had an interest in like ghost stories and paranormal things like that. So that was obviously one explanation for what was going on.
Right. This was the weird thing about the story, is that her body was found in the water tower, which was weird on its own. But then they found this footage of her in the elevator looking as if she was being chased, or she was looking in the hallway and acting erratically. And the one possible explanation is that she was taking a lot of medication for various mental health reasons, and this could have been some kind of break. But the whole story got blown up even more than that, because this hotel is so infamous, and like all this weird stuff had happened there before. Yeah,
I think the Cecil Hotel is one of the most, if not the most, haunted hotels in America.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. I think Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker serial killer, I believe he like stayed there and like walked in covered in blood or something at one point.
Yeah, there were a
lot
all sorts
of crazy stuff.
Famous people who stayed there as well.
Yeah.
The Cecil. I was going to say you could read. People have written books on the history of the Cecil Hotel, and it's.
Yeah, it's crazy. No one really. I mean, I guess the assumption is that she probably went up there herself, and like fell into the water tower, but it's unclear. And it's like, how did she get up there? Why did no one notice what was going on in the elevators? All these questions about it. So it's a very eerie anniversary for.
Yeah, one of those kind of lingering unsolved mysteries.
Well, that wraps up like the anniversary part of this episode, but we also wanted to talk about Black History Month, which is February.
These events aren't directly correlated to any specific anniversary or anything news related, but they are just stories we've covered recently in honor of, in recognition of Black History Month. But they are both incredibly fascinating and pop culturally relevant as well.
Yeah, that's right. They both have connections to movies. The first one is about a guy whose name was Solomon Northup. And if you've seen 12 Years a Slave, which came out, I think, in 2013.
Yeah, I watched it as part of my film school education.
Oh, did you? Okay, yeah. I watched it as well just because it was there. But it's amazing how true the story is. Like, it's all based on this guy, Solomon Northup's memoirs, and the movie is very loyal to his story. Like, it makes a couple of changes, but the general story is the same. He was kidnapped, he was brought south, he was sold into slavery, he had these horrible overseers and saw some really horrible stuff, and then was eventually, a spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie, but, rescued in part by an abolitionist who happened to be passing through, and who figured out who he was, and they worked together, and he managed to escape or to be released. Yeah. I wrote the article, and like I read segments of his memoir, and it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear those firsthand accounts, especially, nearly 200 years removed from the Civil War. Not quite yet, but a century and a half, roughly.
Which is not that long, really.
It's really not that long.
Of history.
It's not at all. And it's so, I think sometimes when we read about history without getting those firsthand accounts, like if you just read the history books they provide in school that are very cursory overviews of things, you kind of miss the empathy part of it. Yeah. And then you read something like the story of Solomon Northup and from his own words, get that perspective, and you realize like how truly horrendous some of these events and the ways people were treated. It was just like inhumane to the highest degree.
Right. One of the crazy things about his story is like he came back north, he published his memoir, and he was so famous. And then he just disappeared, and no one really knows what happened to him at the end of his life. What I read was like there's a possibility he was kidnapped again and sold back into slavery, but no one's really sure. He just kind of disappeared from the historic record. And like when his wife died and said she was a widow, but there's no one really knows what happened to him. Yeah, I think it's wild.
Yeah, that's very strange.
But his memoir is a really incredible story, so I would highly recommend it. And I'm sure you can buy it, but it's also free online because it's in the public domain.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other story we wanted to touch on is also a movie, the movie Glory, which I haven't seen.
I also haven't seen Glory. Okay. I have not. But yeah, that is the story of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, an all-volunteer regiment of all Black soldiers who fought for the Union during the Civil War, which from what I gathered, they were only the second all-black regiment to fight. But
it was, I mean, during the Civil War, like at first, if you were black and you wanted to fight, you couldn't. It wasn't allowed. And then with the Emancipation Proclamation, they opened up, you could enlist. And in Massachusetts, they're like, yes, like we want to form an all-black regiment. There were not a lot of black people in Massachusetts, but they came from all over, and some of them were former slaves. Frederick Douglass's sons joined this regiment, and they went to fight in South Carolina. They had a white commander because, you know, they didn't allow black people to become commanders then. He was a young guy. He was 25, I think, Robert Gould Shaw. He was young and led them, and they had this kind of doomed attack on Fort Wagner. But their bravery during the battle made a lot of people reconsider what they thought about black men fighting, because they clearly fought so bravely and so fiercely.
Right. Well, yeah. And of course, I mean, it's, you know, they were fighting for their own freedom and for the freedom of people who were like them, which I mean, there's a different level of passion when you're fighting for yourself and for those like you, as opposed to being a white person fighting for the lives of black people who you very clearly still don't view as equal to you, because it took another 100 years before they were even remotely considered equal. And obviously there are still problems today with equality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people had different motivations for sure during the war. You know, the thing with their commander, Robert Gould Shaw, is he was killed during the battle. And the Confederates buried him with his soldiers, and they wrote to his parents, and they would try to insult them by being like, we buried your son with, you know, these black soldiers. And his parents were like, great, that's the best place in the world for him to be. That's where he would have wanted to be, which is cool. I mean, there's a lot of really great stories that came out of this regiment. And one of them is this guy, William Harvey Carney. At one point, he was fighting the battle with his fellow soldiers, and the flag bearer like fell, and he rushed forward and he grabbed the flag, and like, despite being shot several times, like got it back to Union lines, and was eventually, not immediately, but eventually awarded the Medal of Honor for that. So yeah, there's all sorts of heroism that emerged from this regiment. And there's a statue in Boston of Shaw and his men. But I think the detail I remember is that like it had the names of the white officers who died on it, but not the black soldiers for a long time. I think like until the 1980s or something crazy like that. And in the movie Glory, Matthew Broderick plays Robert Gould Shaw. But even though there were all these like incredible black men in the regiment who they could have portrayed, they were all fictional characters in the movie. So that's a weird choice, I think. But yeah. But the regiment was like, you know, despite losing the battle, like it's a really incredible story, I think, from the Civil War especially. Yeah,
because another one of those things that kind of often gets glossed over. You think there are a few key battles, Gettysburg mostly, that we really hone in on, but then there are these like smaller stories like this. Same thing I said with Northup. It's like you lose some of that historical empathy until you read stuff like the flag bearer goes down and then he picks it up, and it's like
for
a
sure.
real testament to bravery.
Yeah. That's where the most fascinating stuff in history is these individual stories of people, you know, not these big overarching events or anything, but these human moments. That's what I really enjoy about
No,
history.
I agree with you. I think, that's easily the best part about what you and I do, is like learning those individual stories.
Yeah, I think that's something we really seek out too, is these sort of overlooked stories from history, which is cool. I get to learn a lot. We both do. Yeah,
it's nice. And hopefully anyone listening to this learned something today and is, you know, curious to find out more about it. I mean, a good starting point is to watch 12 Years a Slave if you haven't. That's a very accessible, easy way to kind of start to get into these kinds of stories.
Yeah, for sure.
That's everything major that we had for this History Happy Hour, the inaugural History Happy Hour. Ironically, not a lot of happy events to talk about, but
no, that's true. Do we have any on this list?
The first all-black basketball team, Rosa Parks was born. King Tut's tomb is arguably happy.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big deal, I guess.
It was important.
It's important.
We had some interesting news stories.
Grim.
They weren't,
I guess the news stories are more happy.
Yeah. But hey, that's why it's a happy hour. So if you need to pour yourself a drink.
Go ahead. Raise a glass.
Go right ahead.
But yeah, we'll be back next month. And
we'll be back next month with another one of these. I mean, we're doing the other individual podcasts in between. We have an upcoming series on the Titanic that you and I have been working on, which is hopefully going to be exciting. Of course, if anybody wants to dive more deeply into some of these stories we've talked about, they are all available online to read at allthat'sinteresting.com. So absolutely go and check those out. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to History Uncovered. I'm History Uncovered's producer, Kit Westneat. If you like the show, help others find us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to follow the All That's Interesting and History Revealed pages on Facebook and Real History Uncovered on Instagram. Make sure you don't miss out on the new episodes and subscribe to the History Uncovered podcast. And keep up with our latest stories at allthat'sinteresting.com. If you have a question about the show or just want to say hi, feel free to call us at 929-526-3029 or email us at podcast@allthat'sinteresting.com. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Legends of the Old West and Redacted History. Until next time, keep exploring.
Quick reminder once again to check out surveymonkey.com/r/airwave to take a short questionnaire and help support the show and be entered for a chance to win a $500 Amazon gift card. Once more, that is surveymonkey.com/r/airwave.